The police found my son's jacket, soaked in blood near the quarry, but when I stepped into his bedroom 2 weeks later, something under the bed whispered my name in his voice. "Mom, help me. They're coming back." My knees buckled against the doorframe as ice flooded my veins, and the flashlight trembled so violently in my grip that shadows danced across the walls like living things reaching for me. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me what country you're watching from. I need to know. My voice is reaching people who understand what it means to lose everything you love. Please, stay with me until the very end. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 72 years old, and until 14 days ago, I lived in the same farmhouse where I raised my son Daniel for 43 years, just outside Millbrook, a town so small that everyone knows your business before you do. The whisper wasn't the beginning of my nightmare. It was the moment everything I'd buried came clawing back to the surface, demanding to be seen, demanding to be avenged. Daniel had been acting strange for months before he vanished. Late-night phone calls he'd take outside in the cold, whispering into the darkness while I watched from my bedroom window. Bruises on his arms, he'd explain away as clumsiness at work. That haunted look in his eyes whenever his wife Vanessa entered a room, like a deer sensing a predator nearby. I'd ignored the warnings. All of them. Even the ones from my late husband Robert, who died 5 years ago, under circumstances I never fully believed were natural. Robert had tried to tell me something was wrong with Vanessa, with her brother Marcus, who'd moved into our guest house and never left. But I'd been so desperate to keep my family together, so afraid of being the difficult mother-in-law, that I'd stayed silent. Now my son was missing, presumed dead by everyone except me, and something in his bedroom was calling my name. I forced myself to move forward, one trembling step at a time, until I stood beside Daniel's bed. The whisper came again. Softer now, almost pleading. My hand shook as I lowered myself to my knees, the old joints protesting, and aimed the flashlight beam under the bed frame. Nothing but dust and shadows stared back at me. But the whisper continued, and I realized it wasn't coming from under the bed. It was coming from something attached to the bed itself. My fingers searched the darkness, touching cold metal and plastic, until they closed around a small rectangular device taped to the wooden frame. A recording device. Motion activated. Still whispering Daniel's voice on a loop, triggered by my entrance into the room. My son had left me a message. A warning. A final desperate attempt to expose whatever truth had gotten him killed. I yanked the device free and clutched it to my chest, tears streaming down my face as the recording cycled back to the beginning. "Mom, help me, they're coming back." Daniel knew. He knew something terrible was coming, and he'd tried to leave me evidence. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My son had been afraid, had been in danger, and I'd been too blind to see it until it was too late. I couldn't bring myself to look under that bed any further. Terror seized my throat, choking off my breath, and I scrambled backward out of Daniel's room like a frightened child, fleeing monsters in the dark. My back hit the hallway wall, and I stood there gasping, the recording device clutched in my trembling hands. I needed to think, needed to understand what was happening in my own home, under my own roof, while I'd been sleepwalking through the past 8 years since Daniel married Vanessa. Vanessa, beautiful, charming Vanessa from the city, with her perfect smile and designer clothes, and the way she'd slowly, methodically cut Daniel off from everyone who loved him. I'd watched it happen in slow motion. The canceled Sunday dinners, the missed holidays, the excuses that piled up until months would pass without me seeing my own son, despite living in the same house. She'd seemed so perfect at first. Daniel had been 35 when they met, working as a pharmacist in town, and I'd been thrilled he'd finally found someone after years of failed relationships. Vanessa swept into our lives like a summer storm, exciting, overwhelming, impossible to resist. The wedding had been small, intimate, just family. That's when I first met Marcus, Vanessa's older brother, tall, handsome, with cold eyes that never quite matched his smile. He'd given a toast about family loyalty that made my skin crawl, though I couldn't explain why at the time. 3 years into the marriage, Marcus showed up at our door with 2 suitcases and a sob story about losing his apartment. Just temporary. Vanessa had promised. Until he gets back on his feet. That was 3 years ago. Marcus never left. He moved into our guest house, the small cottage at the edge of the property that Robert had built as a retreat, and made himself at home. He didn't work, as far as I could tell, just spent his days in town, or locked in the cottage, coming and going at odd hours. And slowly, everything changed. Daniel stopped visiting my side of the farmhouse. We lived in the same building. I had my rooms, he and Vanessa had theirs, but we might as well have been strangers. When I did see him, he looked exhausted, worn down, like something was eating him from the inside. Robert noticed it too, before he died. My husband had been a quiet man, thoughtful and observant, and he'd pulled me aside 6 months before his heart attack, to voice concerns I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Something's wrong with Daniel's finances. Robert had whispered one night in our bedroom. I saw some papers on his desk. Large withdrawals, transfers to accounts I don't recognize. And Vanessa's been pushing him to put the farm into a joint trust with her name on it. The farm, $2 million worth of land and buildings, passed down through 3 generations of my family. Robert and I had always planned to leave it to Daniel, to keep it in the family. But Robert wanted to wait. Wanted to understand what was happening first. "We need to protect our son," he'd said. "I think we need to change the will, at least temporarily, until we figure out what's going on." I'd agreed. We'd made an appointment with our lawyer for the following week. Robert died 3 days later. I found myself in the kitchen now, the recording device on the table in front of me, staring at my phone. I should call the police. Tell them about the whisper, about my suspicions, about the feeling in my gut that screamed something was terribly wrong. But what would I say? That I found a recording device in my missing son's room, that I suspected his wife and brother-in-law of what, exactly? I had no proof, no evidence, just an old woman's paranoia and a recording that could be explained away as Daniel leaving himself a reminder or a voice memo. They'd think I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. I reached for my phone anyway, fingers hovering over the keypad, when something caught my eye. Muddy boot prints on the kitchen floor, leading from the direction of Daniel's room toward the back door. Large prints, too big to be mine, too fresh to have been there when I'd walked through an hour ago. Someone had been in the house while I was in Daniel's room. Someone had tracked mud through my kitchen and left through the back door. Someone who might still be outside, watching, waiting. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stood slowly, quietly, and moved toward the back door. It stood slightly ajar, cold night air seeping through the gap, carrying the scent of rain and disturbed earth. The boot prints led outside, across the porch, disappearing into the darkness toward the old barn where Robert used to work. Robert's face flashed through my mind as I stood frozen at that back door, staring into the darkness. His face the way it looked that final night, contorted in agony, foam at his lips, eyes wide with terror, that still haunts my dreams 5 years later. We'd been arguing about Vanessa that evening, not loudly. Robert and I never fought that way, but intensely, the kind of disagreement that cuts deeper than shouting ever could. "We need to protect Daniel," Robert had insisted, pacing our bedroom with papers clutched in his hands. Financial statements, bank records, things he'd found in Daniel's office when our son was at work. "Look at these withdrawals, Eleanor. 50,000 here, 30,000 there, all going to accounts linked to Vanessa and Marcus. Daniel doesn't even know it's happening." I'd wanted to believe there was an explanation. Some reasonable answer that would make everything make sense. "Maybe they're investing," I'd suggested weakly. "Maybe it's for a business venture." Robert's expression had been gentle but firm. "Sweetheart, they're draining him dry, and now Vanessa's pushing to get her name on the farm deed. If we don't act now, if we don't change the will and protect our assets, we're going to lose everything, and Daniel's going to be left with nothing." He'd been right. I knew it then, and I know it now, but I'd been so afraid of causing family drama, of being accused of not trusting my daughter-in-law, that I'd hesitated. "Let's sleep on it," I'd said. "We'll talk to the lawyer next week like we planned." Robert had nodded, kissed my forehead, and gone downstairs to make his nightly cup of chamomile tea. He'd been drinking it every evening for 30 years, a ritual as familiar as breathing. I'd stayed upstairs, organizing papers, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Vanessa had knocked on our bedroom door 20 minutes later, offering to make Robert's tea so I could rest. "You look exhausted, Eleanor," she'd said with that perfect smile. "Let me take care of it tonight." I'd thanked her. Actually thanked her for poisoning my husband. An hour later, I heard the crash from the bathroom. Found Robert convulsing on the tile floor, his body jerking violently, that terrible foam at his mouth. I'd screamed for help, called 911, held his hand while his life drained away in front of me. The paramedics said it was a massive heart attack. The autopsy confirmed it. Robert had no history of heart disease, no warning signs, no family history. But sometimes these things happen, the doctors explained. Sudden cardiac death. Tragic but not uncommon in men his age. I believed them because I had to. Because the alternative was too horrifying to consider. But I'd found things after Robert died. Things that made me question everything. Hidden in his office desk, underneath files and folders, I discovered printouts, research articles about poisons that mimic heart attacks, information about digitalis, a plant-based toxin that causes cardiac arrest and leaves minimal trace in autopsy results unless specifically tested for. Notes in Robert's handwriting. Check Vanessa's background, Marcus pharmaceutical connections. Robert had been investigating them. He'd suspected something, had been gathering evidence, and then he'd died suddenly and conveniently before he could act on any of it. Marcus had been at the house that night too. I'd forgotten that detail until now, but it came rushing back with painful clarity. He'd shown up unexpectedly for dinner, claiming he wanted to spend time with family. He'd watched Robert all evening with an expression I couldn't read, something between curiosity and calculation. Vanessa and Marcus had both been at Robert's funeral, crying perfect tears, offering perfect condolences. Vanessa had held my hand during the service, whispering about how much Robert had meant to her, how grateful she was to have known him. I'd buried my husband and my suspicions together, choosing grief over truth because truth was too dangerous, too impossible to face. But now Daniel was gone too, missing for 2 weeks, his bloodied jacket found near the quarry, police treating it as a likely homicide, and I was standing in my kitchen at midnight, staring at muddy boot prints that led toward the barn, clutching a recording device that whispered warnings in my dead son's voice. The truth had been waiting for me all along. I'd just been too afraid to look at it directly. Not anymore. I grabbed my heaviest flashlight from the drawer, the kind Robert used to keep for emergencies, solid metal that could double as a weapon if needed. My hands were steadier now, anger burning through the fear, giving me courage I didn't know I possessed. Those boot prints led somewhere. Someone had been digging in my barn, tracking mud through my house, and I was going to find out who and why. I stepped through the back door into the cold night air, following the trail across wet grass toward the dark outline of the barn. My heart hammered, but my feet kept moving, one step after another, toward whatever truth waited for me in the darkness. The barn door stood open, creaking slightly in the wind. Inside, I could see disturbed earth in the corner, where Robert used to store his farming equipment, where the soil looked freshly turned and loose. Someone had been digging, recently, tonight. The cold bit through my thin cardigan as I crossed the yard, flashlight beam cutting through darkness thick as tar. Each step felt like walking deeper into a nightmare I couldn't wake from, but I forced myself forward. The muddy prints were clear in the beam of light, leading directly to the barn entrance. Inside smelled of old wood and damp earth, familiar scents from 40 years of living on this property. But something was different tonight. Something disturbed the usual stillness, fresh dirt, recent activity, the sense that I'd just missed someone by minutes. My flashlight found the corner where Robert used to keep his tools. The earth there looked wrong, churned up and loose, nothing like the packed dirt floor that had been undisturbed for years. A shovel leaned against the wall, its blade caked with mud, still wet enough to gleam in the light. Someone had been digging here, tonight while I was in Daniel's room, listening to that recording. My hands shook as I picked up the shovel. It was heavy, awkward in my grip, but I managed to sink the blade into the loose soil. Each scoop felt like uncovering a grave, and maybe I was. Maybe Daniel was buried right here on our property, hidden where no one would think to look. The shovel struck something solid after 3 feet. Not the hard resistance of bedrock, but something that gave slightly, wrapped in black plastic. I dropped to my knees, pushing dirt aside with my bare hands, not caring about the mud under my fingernails or the cold seeping through my clothes. The plastic came free, revealing a duffel bag, the kind Daniel used to take to the gym. Inside, I found his wallet, his phone, the screen cracked but still intact, his wedding ring, the gold band I'd watched him slide onto Vanessa's finger 8 years ago, now discarded like trash, and underneath it all, a journal, the leather cover worn and stained. I opened it with trembling fingers. Daniel's handwriting filled the pages, neat at first, then growing more frantic, more desperate as the entries progressed. The early pages talked about discovering financial irregularities, money missing from accounts he thought were secure, Vanessa's explanations that never quite added up, Marcus's expensive lifestyle despite claiming to be unemployed. Then darker entries, conversations overheard, Vanessa and Marcus discussing the plan and timing, Daniel's growing fear that something terrible was coming. The final entry, dated the day before he disappeared, made my blood run cold. They're planning something. Vanessa and Marcus think I don't know, but I heard them. Mom was right about everything. If something happens to me, look under my bed. I'm sorry I didn't believe you about Dad. I'm so sorry. My son had known, he'd figured out what they were, what they'd done to Robert, and he'd tried to leave me evidence. The recording device under his bed wasn't supernatural. It was Daniel's last desperate attempt to protect me, to expose his killers before they could complete their plan. I clutched the journal to my chest, tears streaming down my face, grief and rage warring inside me. My son had died trying to save me. He'd known the danger, had tried to warn me, and I'd been too blind to see it until it was too late. "Eleanor? What are you doing out here so late?" The voice came from behind me, soft and concerned, and I spun around to find Vanessa standing in the barn doorway. She was backlit by the porch light, her face in shadow, but I could see her expression, worry mixed with something else, something calculating. I quickly pushed dirt back over the duffel bag with my foot, hiding Daniel's belongings from her view. My mind raced, searching for a plausible explanation for why I'd be digging in the barn at midnight. "I heard animals," I said, forcing my voice to sound calm despite my hammering heart. "Thought maybe a raccoon got in, wanted to check before it caused damage." Vanessa's gaze drifted to the disturbed earth, to the muddy shovel in my hands, and for a moment something flickered across her face. Not belief. Something harder, more dangerous. But then her expression smoothed into concern again, and she stepped closer. "You should come inside. It's freezing out here, and you're covered in mud. The stress of Daniel's disappearance is taking such a toll on you." The way she said it, so gentle and caring, made my skin crawl. She was already building a narrative. I realized, already creating a story, where I was the unstable old woman, losing her grip on reality. "Maybe you should see a doctor," Vanessa continued, reaching for my arm. "Talk to someone about what you're going through. Grief can do strange things to a person's mind." I let her guide me back toward the house, playing the role of confused elderly woman, while my mind worked frantically behind the facade. Vanessa was trying to discredit me, to plant seeds of doubt about my mental state, so that anything I might say or discover would be dismissed as delusion. As we walked, I noticed Marcus watching from an upstairs window, phone pressed to his ear, reporting to someone, making plans. They knew I was getting close to the truth, and they were preparing to silence me the same way they'd silenced Robert and Daniel. Inside, Vanessa insisted on making tea. "It'll warm you up," she said, moving around my kitchen, with the ease of someone who'd done this many times before. I watched her every movement, remembering Robert's final night, the tea Vanessa had offered to make. She talked while the kettle boiled, her voice smooth and practiced. "We've been thinking about the memorial service for Daniel. The police suggested we should prepare for the worst. And there's the matter of the farm. It'll need to be managed properly now." She was already positioning herself to inherit, already acting as though Daniel was dead and the property was hers. Vanessa poured tea into 2 cups, adding sugar and milk with practiced ease. She set one in front of me, settling into the chair across the table with her own cup. Drink, she urged gently. You'll feel better. I lifted the cup to my lips, pretending to sip, while secretly watching Vanessa over the rim. When she turned to reach for a napkin, I quickly poured the tea into the potted plant beside me, the one that had survived similar treatments over the past few weeks. As I set the empty cup down, something caught my eye. Behind the sugar container, partially hidden, sat a small bottle of clear liquid, the same kind of bottle I'd found in the trash after Robert died, the kind I'd been too afraid to examine too closely. I waited until the house fell silent, until Vanessa's footsteps stopped creaking overhead, and Marcus's light went dark in the guest cottage, until the clock showed 2 in the morning, and the only sound was my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Then I crept back to Daniel's room. The recording device was where I'd left it, taped under the bed frame, and my fingers found it easily this time. I pulled it free and carried it back to my bedroom, locking the door behind me with shaking hands. The headphones were old, the kind Robert used to use when he listened to audiobooks late at night. I plugged them in and pressed play, and my son's world opened up before me in devastating detail. The recordings spanned 3 months. Hours of conversations captured when Vanessa and Marcus thought Daniel was at work, when they believed they were alone and safe to speak freely. Their voices filled my ears, casual and cold, discussing murder like other people discuss grocery shopping. Robert's death was cleaner than expected, Marcus said on one recording, his tone almost admiring. The digital ass worked perfectly, no trace, just like you said. Vanessa laughed, actually laughed. I told you pharmaceutical connections would come in handy. The old man never suspected a thing, drank his poisoned tea like a good little victim. My hands clenched around the device, rage burning through me so hot I thought I might combust. They'd murdered Robert. Admitted it. Laughed about it. The recordings continued. Plans for Daniel, discussions about timing, about making it look like an accident, about how they needed to be patient, to wait for the right moment. We can't rush this one, Vanessa said on another recording. Daniel's younger, healthier. People will ask questions if he just drops dead like his father. It needs to look natural. An accident. Something no one will investigate too closely. Marcus agreed. The quarry's perfect, remote, dangerous, easy to stage a fall. We just need to get him out there alone. Then came a recording that shattered what was left of my heart. Daniel's voice, confronting them, his tone desperate and afraid. I know what you did to my father. I found his research, the articles about digitalis poisoning. I know you killed him. Vanessa's voice turned to ice. You don't know anything. I'm going to the police, Daniel said. I'm telling them everything. If you do that, Vanessa replied, her words slow and deliberate, your mother will be the one who suffers. We'll make sure of it. An old woman, living alone, so many ways for accidents to happen. A fall down the stairs. Medication mix-up. House fire. Think carefully about what you want to do, Daniel. Silence. Then my son's voice, broken and defeated. Don't hurt her, please. I'll stay quiet. Just don't hurt my mother. He'd protected me. Sacrificed himself to keep me safe. And I'd been upstairs, oblivious, while my son bargained his life for mine. The final recordings were the worst. Vanessa and Marcus planning Daniel's murder in explicit detail. How they'd lure him to the quarry with a fake emergency. How Marcus would push him, make it look like a slip. How they'd stage the scene, plant his jacket near the edge, let the police draw their own conclusions. And then the old woman, Marcus said. How long do we wait? Not long, Vanessa replied. A few months maybe. Let the grief weaken her, make her seem unstable. Then another tragic accident. And everything's ours. $2 million worth of property, free and clear. They'd planned it all, every detail, every murder. My husband, my son, and me. 3 lives worth less than property value to these monsters I'd welcomed into my home. But they'd made one mistake. They'd underestimated Daniel. My quiet, gentle son had been brave enough to leave evidence, to hide this recording where he knew I'd eventually find it. And now I had proof. Concrete, undeniable proof of conspiracy to commit murder. Their own voices, their own words, condemning them. My hands were steady now as I made copies of the recordings. I saved them to my computer, uploaded them to a cloud storage account, burned them onto CDs that I hid in 3 different locations around the house. If something happened to me, if Vanessa and Marcus succeeded in their plan, at least the truth would survive. But I wasn't planning to die. Not anymore. I was planning revenge. The morning sun felt wrong somehow, too bright and cheerful for what I was about to do. I told Vanessa I had a doctor's appointment in the city, watching her face carefully for any reaction. She smiled that perfect smile and offered to drive me, but I declined, citing the need for independence at my age. The drive took 40 minutes, each mile taking me further from the farm and closer to the only person I trusted to help me. Thomas Brennan had been Robert's lawyer for 20 years, handling our estate planning and business matters with quiet competence. More than that, he'd been Robert's friend. His office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, all dark wood and leather chairs. The receptionist recognized me immediately, her expression shifting to sympathy. Everyone in town knew about Daniel's disappearance. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so sorry about your son," she murmured, showing me into Brennan's office. Thomas stood when I entered, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Eleanor, I've been thinking about you. How are you holding up?" I closed the door behind me and locked it. "I need your help, Thomas, and I need you to listen to everything before you say anything." His expression shifted to concern, but he nodded and sat back down. I pulled out my phone, connected it to his speaker system, and pressed play. For the next hour, Thomas Brennan listened to his friend's murder being discussed like a business transaction. I watched his face darken, his jaw clench, his hands grip the armrests of his chair until his knuckles turned white. When the recordings finished, I showed him Daniel's journal, read him the final entry, explained my suspicions, my fears, the pattern I'd been too blind to see until it was almost too late. Thomas was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then he stood, walked to his window, and stared out at the street below. "Digitalis poisoning," he said finally. "It mimics cardiac arrest almost perfectly. Unless you're specifically testing for it, it's nearly impossible to detect in a standard autopsy." "I know. And Marcus worked in pharmaceuticals before he moved in with you." "That's what Vanessa claimed. I never verified it." Thomas turned back to face me, and I saw something fierce in his expression. Not just anger, determination. "There's something you should know, Eleanor. Something I probably should have told you weeks ago, but I was bound by attorney-client privilege." My heart sank. "What?" "Daniel came to see me 6 weeks before he disappeared. He wanted to file for divorce. He was terrified, Eleanor. He told me he feared for his safety, that he'd discovered things about Vanessa and Marcus that made him believe they were dangerous. I advised him to go to the police immediately, but he refused, said he needed more evidence first, that they'd threatened you if he talked." The room tilted around me. Daniel had tried to get help, had reached out to someone he trusted, and it hadn't been enough to save him. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I couldn't. Not while he was alive. Client confidentiality." And after he disappeared, Thomas shook his head. "I had no proof of anything, just a conversation with a frightened man and a gut feeling that something was very wrong. We have proof now." "Yes." Thomas returned to his desk, his expression hardening into something I'd never seen before. Cold, professional fury. "We have enough to bury them. But we need to be careful, Eleanor. If Vanessa and Marcus suspect we're building a case, they'll run. Or worse, they'll accelerate their timeline for you." The thought made my blood run cold. What do we do? "First, we involve law enforcement, but not the local police. They're good people, but this is beyond their expertise. I know a detective in the city, Sarah Chen. She specializes in cold cases and suspicious deaths. She'll know how to handle this." "How long will that take?" "I'll call her today." "But Eleanor," Thomas leaned forward, his expression grave, "you need to go home and act completely normal. Don't let them suspect you know anything. Don't confront them. Don't change your behavior. Don't do anything that might tip them off." "I can do that." "And we need to change your will. Immediately. Remove Vanessa and Marcus as beneficiaries. Make sure that even if something happens to you, they get nothing. We spent the next 2 hours revising my estate documents. Everything went to charity now, to organizations that helped families dealing with elder abuse and financial exploitation. Vanessa and Marcus would inherit nothing but prison sentences. When I left Thomas's office, I felt both empowered and terrified. I was playing a dangerous game now, pretending ignorance while gathering evidence, staying one step ahead of killers who'd already murdered twice. One wrong move, and I'd be the third victim. But I wasn't the helpless old woman they thought I was. Not anymore. I was a mother seeking justice for her murdered son, and I would see this through to the end, no matter what it cost me. Vanessa and Marcus were in unusually good moods when I returned home. The kitchen smelled of roasting chicken and fresh bread, and the table was set for 3. They'd prepared dinner, they said, wanting to discuss family matters and Daniel's memorial service. Every instinct I possessed screamed danger, but I smiled and thanked them, playing my role perfectly. Throughout dinner, they were overly attentive. Vanessa kept refilling my wine glass before it was half empty, encouraging me to drink, to relax, to let them take care of everything. Marcus watched me with predatory intensity every time I lifted the glass to my lips. I pretended to drink, but barely let the wine touch my mouth, claiming my blood pressure medication didn't mix well with alcohol. Vanessa's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "We've been thinking about your future, Eleanor," Marcus said, cutting his chicken with precise movements. "This farm is a lot for someone your age to manage alone. Have you considered assisted living? There are some wonderful facilities in the area." "Very comfortable," Vanessa added. "You'd have people around all the time, medical care on site, no worries about maintaining this big property." They wanted me gone, out of the house, isolated, vulnerable, easier to control, easier to eliminate when the time came. "And there's the financial aspect," Marcus continued. "Property values are high right now. I've been talking to a buyer who's very interested in the land. He's willing to pay top dollar, more than market value, actually. Wouldn't it be easier to sell now, invest the money, secure your future?" Secure their future, he meant. Get the property converted to cash they could access and disappear with. I played confused and overwhelmed, exactly the role they expected. "I don't know. This is Daniel's home, our family's home. It feels wrong to sell it while he's still missing." "Daniel's gone, Eleanor." Vanessa's voice was gentle but firm. "The police have told us to prepare for the worst. We need to think practically about what comes next." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and it took everything I had not to jerk away from her touch. This woman had poisoned my husband, murdered my son, and now sat across from me pretending to care about my well-being. "Just think about it," Marcus urged. "We're not trying to pressure you. We just want what's best for everyone." After dinner, I excused myself, claiming exhaustion. In my bedroom, I examined my wine glass under the light. There was a faint residue at the bottom that hadn't been there before. Something that caught the light wrong, too oily to be just wine. They'd tried to drug me. Tonight. At dinner. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Detective on board. Surveillance starting tomorrow. Stay safe." Tomorrow. I just had to survive until tomorrow, and then Detective Chen would be involved, and I wouldn't be alone in this anymore. But then I heard voices downstairs. Vanessa and Marcus, arguing in hushed tones they thought I couldn't hear. "We can't wait any longer," Marcus hissed. "She's getting suspicious. Did you see how she barely touched the wine?" "Tomorrow night, then," Vanessa replied. Her voice cold and decided. "We'll finish this. Make it look like a fall. Something quick and clean, then we're done." Tomorrow night. They were planning to kill me tomorrow night. I had less than 24 hours to stay alive. Detective Sarah Chen arrived at 9 the next morning, while Vanessa and Marcus were out running errands. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, with an air of quiet competence that immediately put me at ease. I played the recordings for her, all of them. Showed her Daniel's journal, explained the timeline, detailed my suspicions about Robert's death. She listened without interrupting, taking notes, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "We've been investigating Marcus for pharmaceutical theft," she said when I finished. "Small-scale stuff, controlled substances, going missing from hospital inventories. We didn't have enough evidence to prosecute. but we've been watching him. This changes everything. What do we do? Chen leaned forward, her gaze intense. We need to catch them in the act. It's the only way to prove intent and secure convictions for both murders. The recordings give us conspiracy, but we need to show they were actively trying to harm you. My stomach twisted. You want me to let them try to kill me? I want you to wear a wire and act as bait while my team is positioned to intervene the moment you're in danger. It's risky, Mrs. Whitmore. I won't lie to you about that, but it's the best chance we have to put them away for life. I thought about Robert, dying in agony on our bathroom floor, about Daniel, murdered and buried like garbage in some remote section of the quarry, about all the other families Vanessa and Marcus might destroy if they weren't stopped. I'll do it. Chen nodded, unsurprised. We'll set up surveillance equipment throughout the house, hidden cameras in the kitchen and living areas, officers positioned outside, ready to move in on my signal. If at any point you feel unsafe, if they do anything that threatens you, you signal us immediately and we come in. Understood? Understood. We spent the afternoon preparing. Chen's team installed tiny cameras disguised as smoke detectors and picture frames. They fitted me with a wire so small I could barely feel it, tested the audio quality, established emergency signals. I wrote letters while they worked, letters to be opened if something went wrong, explaining everything, making sure the truth would survive even if I didn't. That evening, Vanessa announced she was making my favorite dinner as a peace offering. I feel like we got off on the wrong foot last night, she said with that perfect smile. Let's start fresh, as a family should. I watched her cook, saw her slip something from a small bottle into the kettle when she thought I wasn't looking. The same clear liquid I'd seen behind the sugar container. The same poison that had killed Robert. Marcus hovered nearby, blocking exits, his energy menacing in a way he'd never bothered to hide before. They knew this was their last chance. They were done being subtle. We sat down to dinner, and my heart pounded so violently I was certain they could hear it. Vanessa poured tea for everyone, her smile bright and hollow, her eyes watching me with predatory focus. I lifted the cup to my lips, meeting her eager gaze across the table. In my ear, Detective Chen's voice crackled through the hidden earpiece. We're ready when you are, Eleanor. You're not alone. The tea touched my lips but didn't pass them. I set the cup down carefully, my hands steadier than I'd expected, and looked directly at Vanessa. This tastes strange, I said quietly. Her expression flickered. Annoyance first, then forced concern, then something calculating and cold. It's the same tea we always drink, Eleanor. Maybe your medication is affecting your taste. I stood slowly, gripping the table edge, feeling the weight of the wire against my skin, knowing Chen and her team were listening to every word. Is it? The same tea you gave Robert the night he died. The room froze. Marcus's hand moved toward his pocket, but I kept my eyes locked on Vanessa. What are you talking about? She tried to sound confused, but her voice had lost its warmth. The same tea you planned to give me tomorrow night, according to what I heard you say last evening. Or did you decide tonight was better? More convenient. Vanessa's mask shattered like glass. Her face transformed into something I'd never seen before, something cold and vicious, and utterly without remorse. You stupid old woman, you should have stayed ignorant, should have drunk your tea and died quietly like Robert did. Marcus lunged toward me, but the front door exploded inward before he could reach me. Police, hands where we can see them. Detective Chen and 4 officers flooded into my kitchen, weapons drawn, movements precise and practiced. Marcus froze mid-step. Vanessa's hand dropped from where it had been reaching for something on the counter. A knife, I realized. She'd been going for a knife. On the ground, now. They were forced down, faces pressed to my kitchen floor, hands cuffed behind their backs while they screamed protests and threats that echoed off the walls. Chen pulled out a portable speaker and pressed play. Vanessa and Marcus's own voices filled the room, discussing Robert's murder, planning Daniel's death, laughing about how easy it would be to make an old woman's death look natural. I watched Vanessa's face drain of color as she realized what I'd done, how completely she'd been caught. You can't use that, Marcus sputtered. It's illegal, recorded without consent. Single-party consent state, Chen interrupted calmly. Daniel was one of the parties in these conversations. He had every right to record them, and these recordings gave us probable cause for everything that followed. She turned to me. Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to confirm for the record, did you consume any of the tea Vanessa served you tonight? No, I didn't drink it. We'll be testing it, but I suspect we'll find the same digitalis compound that killed your husband. We've already exhumed Robert's body, Mrs. Whitmore. The new autopsy found lethal levels of digitalis in tissue samples, enough to cause cardiac arrest within an hour of ingestion. Robert, they'd confirmed it. My husband had been murdered, just as I'd suspected all along. And Daniel? My voice cracked on my son's name. Chen's expression softened. We found him this afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore, buried in a remote section of the quarry, exactly where the recordings indicated. I'm so sorry. The room tilted. Daniel was really gone. Not missing, not possibly alive somewhere, dead and buried like trash by the woman he'd loved and trusted. You'll die alone in this house with nothing. Vanessa spat as officers hauled her to her feet. You'll have no one, no family, nothing but this empty farm, and you're pathetic. I'll die knowing you'll spend the rest of your lives in prison, I interrupted, my voice quiet but steady, and that's worth everything. Marcus tried one last desperate play. She's lying. The old woman fabricated all of this. She's senile. We have your voice on recording, discussing pharmaceutical theft, Chen said flatly. We have evidence of controlled substances stolen from 3 different hospitals where you worked. We have your DNA under Daniel's fingernails, from where he fought back when you pushed him. We have everything, Mr. Holloway. You're done. They were dragged out screaming, loaded into police cars, while neighbors gathered on their lawns to watch. The monsters who'd infiltrated my family, who'd destroyed everything I loved, were finally being taken away. I stood in my doorway as the cars drove away, red and blue lights painting the farmhouse walls. The property fell silent around me. Truly silent, for the first time in 8 years. Detective Chen touched my shoulder gently. You were very brave tonight, Mrs. Whitmore. I was terrified. Brave people usually are. She handed me a card. We'll need your statement tomorrow, and there will be a trial. But you're safe now. They can't hurt you anymore. After everyone left, I walked through my empty house, seeing it clearly for the first time in years. This was my home, my family's home, and I'd protected it. The only way I could, by exposing the truth, no matter how painful. I made myself real tea, the kind Robert used to drink, and sat at the kitchen table where my husband had died and my son had been threatened, where I'd almost become the 3rd victim. But I'd survived, and Vanessa and Marcus would pay for every life they'd destroyed. 3 months later, I stood at Daniel's graveside under a gray autumn sky. They'd laid him to rest beside Robert, finally bringing my family back together, even if only in death. The funeral was small, just me, Thomas Brennan, Detective Chen, and a handful of Daniel's childhood friends who'd never stopped searching for answers after he disappeared. People who'd loved my son for who he was, not what he could give them. I'd brought Daniel's journal, the one he'd hidden for me to find. Standing beside his grave, I read from his final entry, my voice carrying across the quiet cemetery. Mom was right about everything. If something happens to me, look under my bed. I'm sorry I didn't believe you about Dad. I'm so sorry. I closed the journal and looked at the simple headstone. You were brave, Daniel. Braver than you knew. You left me the evidence I needed to expose them, to protect myself, to make sure they'd pay for what they did. Thank you for that. Thank you for being strong enough to leave the truth behind. The investigation had revealed the full scope of their crimes. Vanessa and Marcus had been running a pharmaceutical theft operation for years, stealing controlled substances and selling them through a network of dealers. They'd used Daniel's pharmacy connections without his knowledge, forging his credentials, implicating him in crimes he knew nothing about. When Daniel discovered what they were doing, when he threatened to expose them, they decided he was too dangerous to live, just like Robert before him, who'd been investigating their finances and was about to uncover their entire operation. I was supposed to be next, the final obstacle between them and $2 million worth of property they could sell and disappear with. The trial had been swift and brutal. Prosecutors presented the recordings, Daniel's journal, the forensic evidence from both bodies. Vanessa showed no remorse throughout, sitting stone-faced while victim impact statements were read. Marcus tried to blame everything on his sister, claiming he'd been manipulated, but the evidence was overwhelming. 2 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, multiple charges of pharmaceutical theft and fraud. The sentences came down like hammer blows, life without possibility of parole for both of them. I'd attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row where they couldn't avoid seeing me, watching as their lies unraveled, as their carefully constructed facade crumbled, as justice finally caught up with them. After the verdict, I'd sold the farm. I couldn't live there anymore, couldn't walk through rooms where Robert had died and Daniel had been threatened. The property sold quickly to a young family with children, people who'd fill it with laughter and love instead of poison and lies. I'd moved to a small cottage by the ocean, hours away from Millbrook and the memories that haunted every corner of that farmhouse. Somewhere Vanessa and Marcus would never find me, even if they somehow escaped. Somewhere I could finally breathe without fear. I placed flowers on both graves, Robert's and Daniel's, and whispered the words I'd been holding inside for months. You can rest now. Justice found them. I made sure of it. They'll never hurt anyone else. I promise. The wind carried my words away across the cemetery, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something like peace settling over me. My family was gone, but they hadn't died in vain. Their deaths had exposed monsters, had brought killers to justice, had potentially saved other families from similar fates. That had to mean something. It had to be enough. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 6 months after the trial ended. I was sitting on my cottage porch, watching waves crash against the rocks below, when the mailman handed me an envelope with unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a letter from a woman named Patricia Morgan. She'd seen my story on the news, she wrote, and something about it resonated with her own situation. Her daughter-in-law had been acting strangely. Money was disappearing from accounts. Her son seemed frightened, withdrawn. Patricia had a gut feeling something terrible was coming, but no one would listen to her concerns. Could I help? Would I be willing to talk? To share what signs I'd missed? To offer guidance before it was too late? I read the letter 3 times, Patricia's desperation bleeding through every word. She was where I'd been a year ago, sensing danger but unable to prove it, watching her family being destroyed, but powerless to stop it. Except she wasn't powerless. Not if I could help her. I wrote back that same day, told her to document everything suspicious, to trust her instincts, to contact Detective Chen, whose card I enclosed, to protect her assets immediately, change her will, create a paper trail that couldn't be erased. Most importantly, I told her she wasn't alone, that someone believed her, that her fears were valid, and her suspicions mattered. Patricia wasn't the only one. Over the following months, letters arrived from all over the country. Women who'd watched my interviews, who'd recognized themselves in my story, who needed help protecting their families from predators disguised as loved ones. I answered every letter, made phone calls, connected people with Detective Chen and lawyers I'd come to trust, shared the warning signs I'd learned too late, financial irregularities, isolation tactics, threats disguised as concern, the slow erosion of autonomy and independence. Thomas Brennan helped me establish a foundation, the Robert and Daniel Whitmore Foundation for Elder Protection. We funded legal services for families dealing with financial abuse, trained law enforcement to recognize exploitation patterns, created support networks for people who suspected their loved ones were in danger. I spoke at community centers and senior facilities, sharing my story without shame or hesitation. Yes, I'd been fooled. Yes, I'd ignored warning signs. Yes, I'd almost become a victim, but I'd also survived, fought back, and ensured my family's killers would never harm anyone else. That story needed to be told. Those warnings needed to be heard. Every time I helped someone recognize danger before tragedy struck, every time I connected a frightened parent with resources that could protect them, I felt Daniel's presence. Felt like I was honoring his memory by doing what he'd tried to do, exposing predators, protecting the vulnerable, speaking truth even when it was painful. My son had died trying to save me. The least I could do was use that gift to save others. The cottage became a refuge for people seeking advice, a safe space where they could share their fears without judgment. I kept Daniel's journal on my desk, a reminder of why this work mattered, of what happened when good people stayed silent, because they were afraid or embarrassed or didn't want to cause family drama. Silence enabled monsters, truth exposed them. I thought about the whisper that started everything, Daniel's voice reaching out from beyond death, leading me to evidence that would destroy his killers. That recording device under his bed had been his final act of love, his last desperate attempt to protect me. He'd succeeded, and now I was using that protection to shield others from similar fates. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, I want you to know something. Your presence here, listening to my story, bearing witness to what happened to my family, it matters more than you know. Please, hit that like button, not for me, but for every mother, every grandmother, every person who's ever felt something was wrong, but was too afraid to speak up. Subscribe to this channel, because these stories need to be told. These voices need to be heard. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from, but also tell me, have you ever ignored your instincts about someone? Have you ever stayed silent when you should have spoken? Let's create a community where we protect each other, where we listen to those whispers of warning before it's too late. My family's tragedy doesn't have to be yours. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring enough to stay until the very end. I closed my laptop and looked out at the endless ocean, waves rolling in with ancient rhythm, and smiled for the first time in what felt like years. A real smile, born from survival and justice, and the knowledge that I'd transformed my darkest nightmare into something that could help others. Robert and Daniel were gone, but their deaths had meaning now, their story had power, and I would spend whatever years I had left making sure that power protected families instead of destroying them. The sun was setting over the water, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, beautiful and terrible, like everything else in this world, like the truth I'd uncovered, like the justice I'd fought for, like the peace I'd finally found. I was 72 years old, a widow, a mother who'd lost her only child, a woman who'd survived 2 murder attempts and exposed killers who'd hidden behind family bonds. I was also a survivor, an advocate, a voice for people who felt voiceless. And that was enough. That was everything. The waves kept rolling in, steady and eternal, and I sat on my porch, watching them until darkness fell and stars emerged overhead. Somewhere out there, Vanessa and Marcus were locked in prison cells, their carefully planned future reduced to concrete walls and iron bars. Somewhere out there, Patricia and others like her were reading my letters, taking precautions, protecting themselves before it was too late. And here, in this cottage by the sea, I was finally free.